Alright, so today I want to introduce you to what I consider to be possibly the #1 3-gene combination in maybe all of ball pythons, and that is the combination of the leopard, the pastel, and the yellow belly. And if you actually have a snake with all three of those genes in the mix, essentially what you get is you get a really bright yellow snake with a really scrambled up pattern and a really jet black background. Makes for a really impressive combination. And the neat thing about that combination is all three genes are co-dominant, so you can actually take that snake, breed it to something else, and not only reproduce it, but introduce other genes into the combination. It works really well with just about any other gene. It's pretty amazing. And the other cool thing about the combination is all three genes are really inexpensive. So you can actually pick up a leopard, a pastel, and a yellow belly for relatively inexpensive, breed them together, and actually make the combination of all three genes. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you the amazing potential of the leopard, pastel, yellow belly. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with the three individual genes before we mix them together in a combination. And the first one I want to start with is the leopard. This is what a leopard looks like. As a matter of fact, I've been thinking about adding leopard to my collection. I actually don't have this here in my reptile room. If I actually bought a leopard, it would probably be in a combination of the leopard, the pastel, and the yellow belly. And the leopard's pretty interesting. It's actually a dark gene. So if you mix it in with other combination, essentially what happens is it really darkens the background of your combinations. And as a matter of fact, I actually don't have any dark genes here in my collection. This would probably be the first dark gene that I actually had. It's probably the best dark gene. I'd say when it comes to combinations, I consider the leopard to be pretty much the #1 king of combos when it comes to co-dominant mutations. And the leopard also is considered a pattern enhancing gene. Really jumbles up the pattern in a lot of your combinations. So this is one gene in the combination. Another one I wanted to show you is the pastel. This is what a pastel looks like. And I'd say when most people think of pastel, they think of a yellow snake. So if you actually are looking to add some yellow to one of your combinations, pastel is probably the #1 choice. As a matter of fact, if you look over here on Morphmarket, pretty much the #1 gene in all of ball pythons over here on Morphmarket, and almost 200,000 ball pythons, pastel is #1. I think it's like 3 times more popular than the #2, which is kind of crazy. And pastels can be really variable. Sometimes it can be really bright and sometimes they can be a little bit browned out. And if you actually notice on this one, it jumbles up the pattern just a little bit with the pastel. If you actually add pastel to the leopard, you can really jumble up the pattern quite a bit. And if you actually take pastel and you want to make it even brighter, you can add another gene to the pastel, and that is yellow belly. This is what yellow belly looks like. And yellow belly is kind of a tricky gene. It almost looks like a normal ball python. As a matter of fact, a lot of people have a hard time telling the difference between a yellow belly and a normal. Usually you can flip them over and kind of look at the belly and see some checkering on the belly of a yellow belly. And a lot of people say, hey, I flipped over my normal and it was checkered too. So a lot of people, it's really close to a normal. Sometimes you can't tell the difference. And in a lot of yellow bellies, you actually have some flaming coming up right on the bottom between the patterns here, like right in the black. You can see a little bit of flaming here. Sometimes you can see flaming on yellow bellies and sometimes you can't at all. But yellow belly is really powerful, especially when you mix it in with pastel. So here's what happens if you take the yellow belly, the pastel, and the leopard, and you mix all three genes together. Take a look at this crazy combination. I'd say this is one of my favorite, hands down by far. Pretty crazy. And just look at how jumbled up the pattern is. That is between the combination of the pastel and the leopard. Really jumbles up the combination. And if you actually take a look at this one, this actually has a little bit of white coming right here. This is pretty unusual for this type of a combination. Sometimes you can get random ringers in the ball pythons. It's actually called a ringer with a little bit of white coming through. And usually the ringers are from het pieds. You can see this one has one copy of the recessive pied gene. So sometimes in some combinations with het pieds, just kind of randomly you get these ringers, which is kind of interesting. But I'd say this is probably one of my favorites with the really super bright yellow. The bright yellow is coming from the combination of the pastel and the yellow belly, and then the really dark background's coming from the leopard, and then the really jumbled up pattern, that is from the combination of the pastel and the leopard. That is a pretty amazing combination. So here's another gene you can actually add to that to really enhance it, and that is spot nose. And spot nose is kind of interesting if you look at it just as a standalone morph. Sometimes it can look almost like a normal ball python, but the spot nose, when you actually mix it in with a lot of combinations, it tends to really jumble up the pattern, especially when you mix it with leopard and pastel. You can really explode the pattern. And usually you know pretty much 100% sure that you have a spot nose from the pattern on the head. You can definitely tell in most of your spot noses that it has a definite, it almost looks like the paw print of a cat or something like that on the top of a spot nose, which is kind of interesting. So here's what happens if you add spot nose to the leopard pastel yellow belly. Take a look at this crazy snake. Essentially what it does, it takes that combination and really scrambles up the pattern even more, just really explodes it into this really crazy looking combination. I say the spot nose and the leopard is definitely one of my favorite combinations, and then you add the pastel and the yellow belly, then it just really brings out the yellow with a really high contrast. Pretty amazing. So here's another gene you can actually add to the mix, and that is Orange Dream. Orange Dream is another gene that I'd like to add to my collection. Essentially what Orange Dream is it really brings out a lot of oranges, a lot of colors. You can make some really good improvements to a lot of your bright, flashy combinations by adding Orange Dream. And Orange Dream is a little bit tricky. Sometimes it can almost look like you have multiple genes in an Orange Dream. Sometimes you can almost be tricked into thinking there's some enchi in your Orange Dream, and that's just part of the Orange Dream. It really reduces the pattern. And a lot of the Orange Dreams, if you actually flip them over and look at the belly, you can almost see it right on this one. Essentially what it has is it has these lines on either side of the belly that look like het pied markers, which is pretty interesting. And usually your het pied markers will come like on the bottom third of the snake, usually from the vent, just up a little bit on the snake. But the Orange Dream, a lot of times you'll have those markers all the way up the entire length of the belly. It almost looks like someone took a Sharpie marker and drew lines on either side of the belly. It is pretty amazing. So here's what happens if you take Orange Dream and you work it in with the leopard pastel yellow belly. Take a look at this crazy combination. And you can do so many things with the combination of the leopard, the yellow belly, and the pastel to really make it even better. It's kind of crazy. And essentially you see on this one, the Orange Dream really brings out a lot more of the brightness of the snake, and it really reduces the pattern even more into kind of these little blobs all over the snake, which is pretty amazing. There's so many things you can do with this combination. So here's another one I ran across. This was kind of wild, working genetic stripe into this combination. And let me tell you, when I go to some of the reptile shows over here in Colorado in the United States, not a lot of people are actually working with genetic stripe. Although if you actually look over here in Morphmarket, there's quite a few genetic stripes. It's actually a recessive mutation, so it's a little bit harder to work with. Essentially what you'd have to do is you'd have to breed the leopard pastel yellow belly to a genetic stripe, and then you would get the leopard pastel yellow belly het genetic stripe. It'd have one copy of the gene. Then you have to breed that back to either a visual genetic stripe or a het to actually get the gene. You need two copies of genetic stripe working into the combination. A little bit harder to actually work it in, but since it's a recessive gene. And here's what happens if you work genetic stripe into the leopard pastel yellow belly. Take a look at this crazy snake. That is one of the wildest combinations that I've actually seen. I clicked on it. I was like, I don't know how good the internet actually works down here in my reptile room. I'm pretty far away from the router, but take a look at this crazy striping on this snake. It's kind of interesting. As a matter of fact, a lot of times you can actually work lesser into the leopard to make a similar striped snake. So it's kind of interesting that this one pretty much has the same thing as a leopard lesser visual appearance using the genetic stripe, and it still keeps a lot of pattern on the sides. I say this is probably one of my favorite genetic stripe combinations. Pretty amazing. So here's the last one I wanted to show you, and that is the pinstripe. I'd say the pinstripe is another one of my favorite genes. I actually have quite a few pinstripes here in my collection. And the pinstripe, when it's young, they can look really super bright gold, almost like a metallic gold. Probably one of the brightest gold snakes that you can actually get. And here's what happens if you work pinstripe into the leopard pastel yellow belly. Take a look at this crazy snake. It just really explodes the pattern into all these little tiny freckles freckles, and it almost keeps the stripe from the pinstripe right on top of the snake. So essentially what's happening with this one, you actually mix the pinstripe with the pastel to get the lemon blast, and it's a really strong effect mixing the pastel with the pinstripe. It really explodes the pattern. And then when you add a leopard to the lemon blast, that's what really explodes it until all these little freckles. And then you add the yellow belly, that really brings out a lot of the color. And then the addition of the leopard actually darkens the spots and gives you more of a high contrast. That is a pretty amazing combination. All right, so what is time for the question of the day? And Rathalos asks, do female ball pythons grow much bigger than the males? And that is a very good question. So when it comes to the size difference between the male and the female ball python, I'd say pretty much everyone agrees that the females tend to get bigger than the males. But kind of the interesting thing is especially like in an operation like I am breeding ball pythons, if I go through and I feed all my snakes and I get to the end and I have leftover rodents, I pretty much prefer to feed those extra rodents to my females because I want bigger females that will lay more eggs at the end of the season. That's kind of the goal of breeding. I'd say, you know, if you're actually breeding ball pythons, you tend to preferentially feed extra rodents to the females. And when it comes to the size of ball pythons, keep in mind that the more you feed them, the bigger they get. So I'm not really convinced that the females will actually get bigger than the males. If you actually took the exact same size rodent side by side and fed a male and a female the exact same rodent size and the exact same frequency, I don't know if the females would actually get bigger than the males. I think it's pretty much preferential treatment to the female ball pythons. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.